A woman stands in light so bright it hurts to imagine. Jeweled robes, gold chains at her wrists, gold chains at her neck, so heavy that 2 Roman guards walk beside her just to carry the weight. She does not cry. She does not beg. Around her, thousands of voices speaking a language she understands perfectly, a language she refuses to answer in. She's been walking for 3 hours. She will walk for 4 more. The procession stretches out ahead of her. Caged lions dragged from Africa. Soldiers still bleeding from battle, bound in iron. Painted replicas of burning cities carried through the streets. All of it moving slowly past Romans who lined every road just to see this. And behind all of it, silence. The space reserved for those who will not see another sunrise. Look at her again. The jewels catching the full force of the Mediterranean sun. The robes still unmistakably royal. The chains still gold. Why is she wearing jewels to her own execution? And why exactly aren't they killing her? This is the moment history claims to remember. A captured queen, a Roman triumph, a public humiliation. But what you think happened here never happened at all. Or worse, it did, but for reasons no one has ever wanted to say out loud. To understand what Rome actually did to queens, you first have to understand what queens were never permitted to be. If documented history still matters to you, stay close, because what's coming is not what you were taught. Her feet are bleeding. She doesn't look down. 272 CE, Queen Zenobia of Palmyra. While Rome spent years tearing itself apart through civil war, she carved out an empire stretching from Egypt to Anatolia. Roman legions couldn't stop her advance because those same legions were busy slaughtering each other over the throne. But civil wars eventually end. When Emperor Aurelian finally turned his attention east, her forces collapsed. She fled toward Persia with whatever remained of her army. They caught her at the Euphrates River. She did not resist. There was simply nowhere left to run. Captured enemies were paraded through Rome in what were called triumphs, public celebrations of military victory. Defeated kings were displayed in chains and then executed in the Tullianum, the stone chamber carved into the Capitoline Hill where Rome's most dangerous enemies were strangled or left to starve. This had been tradition for 5 centuries. Zenobia would walk through Rome in golden chains. Then she would die. That was the story, except the Historia Augusta, a collection of imperial biographies written 40 years after her capture, describes her adorned with jewels that caught the sunlight. Why waste expensive display on someone about to be killed? Every ancient account highlights one particular detail. She maintained extraordinary composure throughout the entire ordeal. Why does every witness feel the need to mention her dignity? What exactly were they watching for? Aurelian captured Zenobia in 272 CE. He did not parade her through Rome until 274 CE. 2 full years. Standard practice was immediate display. Vercingetorix walked in Caesar's triumph within months of his capture. Jugurtha was paraded the same year he surrendered. So what took 2 years? Most accounts simply stop here. They tell you she walked through Rome in chains. They tell you crowds jeered. They call it humiliation. What they do not tell you is what humiliation actually meant to Rome, or why it required 2 years of careful preparation. Most people stop listening at this point. That is exactly why history keeps lying. Here is what Roman law actually said about war captives. The principle was called ius gentium, the law of nations. It stated plainly that military defeat transforms free people into property. Once a city fell, once a now. Army surrendered, its people became legally enslaved regardless of their former status, regardless of their gender. A defeated queen held no more legal standing than a defeated foot soldier. In fact, she held less. Roman law protected citizens from certain punishments. To flog a Roman citizen publicly was considered scandalous. To execute one without proper trial sparked genuine outrage, but foreign captives carried none of those protections. They could be displayed, sold, or killed entirely at the discretion of their captors. The 12 Tables, Rome's earliest legal code, dating back to the 5th century BCE, made this explicit. Prisoners taken in war became property of the Roman state. So if captive queens were legally slaves by definition, why did Rome consistently treat them differently from other slaves? After Cleopatra's death, her daughter Cleopatra Selene was taken to Rome as a child. She was not executed. She was not enslaved in the traditional sense. She was married off to a client king and sent to rule Mauretania. Why would Rome legitimize the bloodline of an enemy they had just annihilated? Why hand royal authority back to someone whose own mother had nearly destroyed the Republic? 60 CE Britain. When King Prasutagus of the Iceni died, he left a will splitting his territory between his daughters and Emperor Nero, a compromise designed to preserve a measure of independence while satisfying Roman demands. Roman officials ignored it entirely. They seized everything and declared the kingdom forfeit. Queen Boudica protested. They flogged her publicly in front of her own people. Her daughters, likely teenagers, certainly unmarried, were violated by Roman soldiers, also publicly, also in front of their people. Tacitus records this with what he himself describes as unusual directness for such matters. He emphasizes that even Romans found it disturbing. The problem is this: Roman law allowed every bit of it. Roman military culture had fully normalized it. Captured women were considered spoils of war. This was not controversial. So why did Tacitus feel compelled to note that even Romans were unsettled by it? What line had actually been crossed? The Romans were not mindless brutes. They constructed legal systems that survived for millennia. They wrote extensively about virtue, justice, and honor. They understood dignity as a concept. So when they stripped a queen naked and flogged her while her subjects watched, they knew with complete precision what they were doing. They were not punishing her. They were answering a question. The triumphs, the public displays, the careful choreography of captured royalty walking through Roman streets in chains, none of it was about showing off conquered enemies. It was about proving something Rome desperately needed conquered people to believe. To understand what that was, you need to see what happened before the triumphs. What took place in the months, sometimes years, between capture and parade. Captive queens went through a process that Roman records barely acknowledge. Between capture and triumph, they were not held in ordinary prisons. They were held in preparation. The historia Augusta notes that Zenobia was so physically weakened by captivity that guards had to support her during the procession, not from visible torture. The jewels and robes were intact. Her body showed no marks of deliberate physical damage. What it showed was something far more calculated. Controlled starvation, enough food to survive, not enough to maintain any real strength. The amount was precise. Roman military physicians understood nutrition. They knew exactly how much grain, how much water, how much protein kept a body alive while guaranteeing progressive muscle loss. Rations were delivered on irregular schedules, sometimes twice in a day, sometimes once every 2 days. The unpredictability stopped the body from ever adjusting to a routine. Sleep deprivation through constant noise and deliberately irregular schedules. Guards changed watch with maximum disruption. Doors were slammed at random intervals throughout the night. Conversations were held near her cell at odd hours. Torches were placed at midnight, precisely when darkness might have finally allowed real rest. The cell was never fully dark, never fully quiet, never fully predictable. Isolation that alternated with forced interaction. Days of complete silence where no one spoke to her, no one acknowledged her existence. Food delivered through a slot in the door like she was something less than human. Left entirely alone with nothing but her thoughts and the growing weakness spreading through her body. Then sudden interrogations, questions about Palmyra's treasury, questions about her generals, questions about her son's location, questions she had already answered, questions that served no purpose except to force her to speak, to engage, to remember she was still human enough to be questioned. Then silence again, not enough to damage the body visibly, just enough to guarantee she could not stand without help, just enough that when the day finally came for her to walk through Rome, she would need Roman hands to hold her upright. The symbolism was completely deliberate. She would walk under her own power, or rather she would attempt to walk under her own power, and fail, and Rome would be there to support her, the empire catching the queen it had broken. But there was something else embedded in the preparation process, something the sources mention only in passing. Captive royalty were required to watch. Watch what? Other prisoners being executed, gladiatorial games, public punishments in the arena. Cassius Dio mentions this debtor ill when writing about captives from Decabulus's Dacial Wars. They were brought to Rome months before Trajan's triumph, and during that time they were regularly taken to the Colosseum, not to fight, to observe. They watched criminals thrown to animals. They watched gladiators bleed out in the sand. They watched prisoners of war from earlier campaigns executed in elaborate staged battles, reenactments of Rome's victories performed by men who are about to die. They sat in specially designated sections, guarded visible to the crowd. The audience could see them watching, could see their expressions, could see their reactions. Why? To make absolutely certain they understood what mercy looked like. When Zenobia walked through Rome in golden chains, too weak to stand without support, she had already spent months watching what happened to captives Rome did not consider worth preserving. She had seen men torn apart by animals. She had watched gladiators bleed out while crowds cheered. She had seen prisoners of war, men who had once been soldiers, who had once fought for their kingdoms, reduced entirely to entertainment. She had seen what execution looked like up close. She knew what she had been spared, and everyone watching her walk through those streets knew that she knew. Before triumphs, captive royalty were bathed and dressed in their own royal regalia. Their jewelry was returned to them. The preparation for this was meticulous. Ancient sources record that Zenobia's robes were repaired where campaign damage had worn them. Her jewels were cleaned. Professional jewelers were brought in specifically to restore their brilliance. Her hair was arranged in the Palmyrene royal style. Every single detail was considered. Every element of her appearance had to be flawless, not mercy, contrast. The message was not, "Look at our captive." The message was, "Look at what power looks like when it cannot protect you." Think carefully about what the crowd actually saw. A woman dressed in silk that cost more than most Romans earned in a full year, wearing jewelry representing the accumulated wealth of an entire kingdom. Every visible element announcing royalty, authority, status. Except she could not walk unassisted. A queen who had once commanded armies, who had signed treaties with Persia, who had administered justice over millions of people, who had executed enemies and pardoned allies at will, who had minted coins bearing her own face beside the emperor's image, openly claiming equality with Rome itself, now walking through Roman streets in chains while guards held her upright because her own body could no longer support her. Her robes were royal, her jewels were real, her hair was perfect, but she needed help to take each step. That contrast was everything. That was the entire purpose of 2 years of preparation. To produce a woman who looked like power, made flesh but moved like something already broken. Roman triumphs were psychological warfare, but not against the defeated queen. They were messages sent to her people, to allied kingdoms watching from the crowd, to future rebels sitting somewhere distant, weighing the cost of resistance. The unspoken message was always the same. If divine right could have saved her, it would have. If military strength could have saved her, it would have. If political authority could have saved her, it would have. None of it did. But that still does not explain why certain queens were spared entirely. Zenobia lived. Most captive kings died immediately after their triumphs. Vercingetorix, the Gaulish chieftain who unified the tribes against Caesar, was executed within hours. Jugurtha, king of Numidia, was starved to death in the Tullianum for 6 days while Rome celebrated above him. Simon Bar Giora, leader of the Jewish revolt, was strangled in the Forum while Titus's triumph continued on toward the Temple of Jupiter. Zenobia was given a villa outside Rome. Ancient sources claim her daughters married Roman senators. Why? The answer is not found in what Rome did to its enemies. It is found in what Rome needed from its allies. By the 3rd century CE, Rome controlled territory stretching from Britain to Mesopotamia. They could not garrison every province, could not maintain a watchful eye on every border, could not station legions in every city that might consider rebellion. The mathematics simply did not work. Rome maintained roughly 30 legions, approximately 150,000 legionaries. That is 1 soldier for every 300 people in the empire. Not enough to occupy, only enough to punish. So Rome ruled through client kings, local rulers who kept their thrones by accepting Roman oversight. This system required one thing above everything else: credibility. Client kings had to genuinely believe their cooperation would be rewarded. But they also had to believe, without any doubt, that challenging Rome meant total and absolute destruction. Rome ruled through fear, but not simply fear of conquest. Fear of worthlessness. Fear that everything you built would mean nothing. Fear that your bloodline would be absorbed. Fear that your kingdom would forget your name entirely. Fear that your own children would become Roman. When Rome captured a queen, they faced a direct choice: executed her. Fast, clean, public. She becomes a martyr immediately. The people remember her as a hero who chose death over submission. Resistance becomes noble. Sacrifice becomes honorable. Another generation grows up on stories about the queen who refused to kneel. And stories are dangerous. Stories inspire. Rome had learned this lesson through Spartacus, whose execution had helped inspire 3 additional slave revolts. In the following century, or let her live, keep her visible, let her age in plain sight, let her become ordinary, let her people watch their once invincible queen living as a Roman dependent, her daughters married to Roman men, her grandchildren speaking Latin as their first language, her entire bloodline quietly absorbed into the very empire that destroyed everything she built. Let them watch power dissolve into complete irrelevance. Execution creates legends. Survival creates questions. Zenobia spent her final 30 years in that villa outside Rome. Ancient sources do not record what she did there, whether she wrote anything, whether she received visitors, whether she maintained any correspondence with Palmyra, whether her daughters came to see her. We do not know if she ever asked them to. Consider what survival actually meant for her. Every morning waking in a Roman villa, eating Roman food, speaking Latin because there was no one left around her who spoke Palmyrene, watching her daughters marry men whose fathers had conquered her empire, watching her grandchildren grow up entirely Roman, not tortured, not imprisoned, not executed, simply irrelevant. Executed, simply irrelevant. Executed ends the story. The queen becomes legend. Her people can say she died rather than submit, that she chose honor, that she resisted until the very end. But survival makes people ask whether resistance was worth it at all. And if the answer even might be no, why would anyone consider resisting again? Now return to Boudica. Her flogging, her daughters violated in public before the eyes of the Iceni people. Rome did not do that to break her. They did it to provoke her, They wanted the rebellion because experience had shown them that gradual subjugation produced ongoing, persistent resistance. But when Rome deliberately provoked immediate, total rebellion and then crushed it completely, the conquered territory went quiet for generations. Boudicca's rebellion ended with approximately 80,000 Britons dead in a single afternoon on an unrecorded battlefield. Her army, vastly larger than the Roman forces, was completely annihilated through superior discipline and positioning. Tacitus claims she poisoned herself rather than face capture. Her defeat was so total, so devastating, that Britain stayed quiet for 3 full generations afterward. A living Boudica would have been genuinely dangerous, a symbol of continued resistance, a rallying point for future rebellion. A dead Boudica, crushed after a failed revolt that consumed 80,000 of her own people, became a warning that no one needed to speak aloud. The Romans understood something we prefer to pretend we have moved past. The cruelest thing you can do to a queen is not kill her. It is let her live just long enough to watch everything she built become meaningless. 3 generations after Boudica, Roman historian Cassius Dio writes about British queens with a tone that borders on genuine anxiety. He describes Queen Cartimandua of the Brigantes, a Roman ally who handed over the fugitive Caratacus and maintained regional peace for decades, using language that emphasizes her political marriages, her diplomatic capabilities, her talent for negotiation. He never once mentions military strength, never suggests she ruled through force, because Rome had successfully redefined what queenship was permitted to mean in Britain. Not warriors, diplomats, mediators, marriage brokers, never threats. After Zenobia, no Eastern queen challenged Rome for 2 full centuries. When Palmyra was rebuilt, it never crowned another woman. A city-state that had been ruled by queens since the 1st century CE simply stopped, not because any law prohibited it, because of memory. After Boudica, Celtic tribes in Britain stopped placing women in military command positions. The archaeological record makes this plain. Warrior burials that had included women for centuries abruptly stopped, including them after 60 CE. This was not coincidence. This was learned behavior, passed down through generations. Rome fell in 476 CE. The empire that spent centuries perfecting the art of breaking queens without killing them collapsed from within, weakened by succession crises, civil wars, and unstable leadership at its core. And one of the recurring structural failures was this. Rome never successfully established female succession. Imperial wives and mothers wielded enormous influence, operating through shadow power. But that very ambiguity created instability at every transition. Agrippina, Livia, Julia, Domna, powerful women forced to operate through sons and husbands because direct rule was permanently closed to them. The same system that destroyed foreign queens ultimately prevented Rome from stabilizing its own. The irony is almost remarkable. Almost. Zenobia's villa still exists. It is a ruin now, sitting outside Rome, barely marked, almost never visited. No organized tours, no plaques explaining what happened there. The Mamertine prison, where male captive kings were executed, is a fully preserved tourist attraction. You can stand in the actual cell where Vercingetorix died. You can see the space where Jugurtha starved over 6 agonizing days. Guided tours run every hour on the hour. There is no monument to what happened to queens, no marker for Boudica's daughters, whose names history never even bothered to record. No memorial for the women who survived Roman triumphs and spent decades afterward in Roman villas watching their empires slowly forget them. History preserves the executions. It discards the survival, because survival was not mercy, it was the punishment that lasted longest. We still do this, not with chains, not with try. hunts through city streets. But we still measure power by who breaks publicly and who manages not to. We still watch powerful women fall and immediately ask whether she stayed dignified, whether she cried, whether she begged, whether she held her composure. We have significantly upgraded the technology of humiliation. We have not touched the impulse behind it. History asks what happened to captured queens. The better question is what Rome needed captured queens to become in order for the empire to keep functioning, and whether we have genuinely stopped needing that. If stories like this one disappear, we do not evolve. We simply repeat. Crimson Archive exists because someone has to remember. If that matters to you, like this video and subscribe so these stories reach the people who need to hear them. But the story does not end with their deaths. It ends with what Rome did after.